This segment is brought to you by Hamilton High Street Senior Residence, Richmond's newest senior living community.
50 years ago this month, one of the great sporting events took place in this country and in the former Soviet Union. It was going to be a simple hockey series between the NHL best and the amateur world champions from the former Soviet Union. It turned into so much more. This month, CBC and CBC Gem has launched a four-episode documentary called Summit 72. Joining us is the award-winning, internationally acclaimed director, writer, and producer, Robert MacAskill. He makes up part of an award-winning team that has put this doc series together, and he joins us from Toronto. Welcome to our city tonight, Robert.
Thank you, Jim.
For people that have not seen this before, this series, maybe weren't born then, too young. I was maybe 4 or 5 when this came out. Talk about what, as I said, was supposed to be a nice friendly between two countries, and it quickly became us versus them in this winner-take-all, knock-down, drag-em-out fighting hockey series.
Well, we certainly believe as Canadians that one of the things we did better than anybody in the world was play hockey. The Canadian content in the NHL at the time was more than 99%. And we felt that there were very few people, very few countries anywhere on the planet who could play the game as we did. Some knew that there was a strong European game, and some people, such as Rod Sealing, some of the players like Rod Sealing, Harry Sinden, the coach, had played the Soviet team before and had a sense of how they were developing their game. The Soviets, of course, used sport as they used science and the space race to show how great the system was that they were part of and how it would be superior to a North American or capitalist society. And so they primed themselves to face the Canadians, and they reached a point in their development where Anatoly Tarasov said, the moment has arrived now. We can compete with the Canadians. They weren't sure they could beat the Canadians, but they felt they could respectably compete with them. And so that enabled the thing to go forward.
And not to take away from any of the great players that I grew up with, I'm thinking Phil Esposito, people like that, but this is another era where athletes are not training intensely throughout the summer months. They're showing up overweight, they're drinking lots of beer, they're having a good time. Again, great athletes, but when they get into game one, this is just going to be a rout. They lose game one, 7-3. I'll never forget the look around the living room in my home, my dad and the neighbors going, what has just happened? Again, this is such of its time that there's no mystery left with countries playing each other. And you get into game two, and by the time they get to Vancouver, Phil Esposito, talk about what I think is a great moment for a leader where they are booed off the ice, and Espo steps up and says, enough.
It was certainly one of the turning points in the series, and you've just given a pretty good reprise. They did come back after that humiliating defeat in game one, came to Toronto. Harry retooled the team, began to realize very quickly that his original vision for having everybody play and substituting players and line combinations was likely not going to work. They won game two, but tied in game three, and the Soviets presented some real surprises with youth and tremendous discipline in game three. And by the time Vancouver game four happened, the wheels just completely came off, and it was another loss. So out of the first 4 games that we were expected to sweep in Canada, we had only won 1. And Phil Esposito said, I really want to be chosen as the game star tonight because I want to do the interview at the end of the game and give the country a piece of my mind, because they were booing Team Canada and they were cheering for the Soviets, which was completely unexpected by absolutely everybody in the country. Vancouver is a very educated hockey town. And they could tell that, the Canadians were facing a tremendous opponent, and they cheered them as I think they should have. I'm not sure they should have booed Team Canada, but a hockey fan likes to express themselves as they feel the story warrants.
And for viewers that are not old enough to remember this, once the series moves to Moscow, the drama just increases. And I'm not giving anything away here, but you get into Game 7 and Game 8. I want to add, I think that 90% of the Canadian population watched the final game, Game 8. But the drama the bugging of hotel rooms, and Peter Mahovlich is in the stands trying to rescue then agent Alan Eagleson. It's got all the elements of a nighttime soap.
Yes, I think unless you had a recording of the games, you could tell the story and very few people would likely believe you. There were so many odd things that had occurred, and Game 8 itself may not have started to play because of a referee switch. That was one of the tactics the Soviets tried to employ. Kind of reviewed those first 4 games. We go to Moscow, play a great Game 5, but wind up losing it. So Team Canada really had their backs against the wall, and wound up winning 6 and 7. So it all came down to Game 8, and the Soviet system. And I refer to the system, not the people, certainly not the players, but the politicians and authorities. They really felt they had the victory, and it was slipping through their fingers. So they tried a number of things during Game 8 and before Game 8 to give their team an advantage. And the Canadian crowd, 3,000 fans from Canada attended those games in Moscow. They were all chanting, "Let's go home, let's go home."
That's right.
And be it a forfeit or let the series go unfinished. They didn't really care, but they didn't want to be cheated.
I want to go out on this question, Robert. You're the expert. There's a comment in one of I think the first episode, where I believe Ken Dryden, the former great Montreal Canadian goaltender, says the Game 1 was the most transformative game in NHL history. It was a war, but what the Russians brought to the game was certainly something that is a positive for what the NHL would go on to become.
That's right. We don't spend an enormous amount of time analyzing the style of play of hockey, but at the time, NHL hockey was very much a north-south game. And there wasn't the intricacy that we witnessed that night by the Soviets. And again, yes, some people in the country had seen that. Certainly people in Winnipeg, where some international games have been played, and we've seen Soviet junior teams play, but nobody had ever seen it at this level, at this kind of level of skill as well, and speed. And we watched a game that has now merged into the kind of game that we see today, where it is physical, but it's also very highly skilled, and there's enormous discipline with conditioning on players. Back in those days, NHL players would freely admit they take the first half of the season to play themselves into shape and then get ready for the playoffs, and that's the way that went. The Soviets played 11 months a year and trained 11 months a year, and they were ready, and they knew that the respectability of their country was on the line, and it meant a lot more to them than just winning a hockey series.
The series is called, the 4-part documentary is Summit 72. It airs this month on CBC and CBC Gem. Revisit if you grew up watching this. This is legendary stuff. And if you've never seen the whole story of this 1972 series, celebrating its 50th anniversary this month, check it out. Robert MacAskill is part of the award-winning team that put this together. Robert, thanks for your insight, and we appreciate you joining us to look back to the days when you and I were watching this series in our public school.
Thank you, Jim.
Cheers.
It's been my pleasure.
Wild snap, work, fell. Here's another shot. Right by the score. It is done. And scored for Canada.
This segment was brought to you by Hamilton High Street Senior Residence, Richmond's newest senior living community.